I want to talk to you about a new book today that is so important. It's called The Bitcoin Standard. Since it's about a book, and Ty inspired me to read more than anybody, I'm doing it here at Ty's house. Those are not my cars. And these aren't my books not in my garage. But this book, it's called The Bitcoin Standard. The Decentralized Alternative to Central Banking by Saifedean Ammous. I'll put the link in under this video. Really important. I mean, I was a Bitcoin bull before reading this book, but let me tell you something. As an econ major, this book just blew me away. And, it's brand new. I'm excited to see if people say there's things wrong with it, I'd be super interested to hear. But let me tell you why I love it. Okay? So first of all, it really talks about, most of the book is about the history of money. And one of the most important parts about money is that it is scarce. It's hard to produce more because, money is important, and money develops naturally in societies, among people. Wherever there's some sort of commerce going on, money develops. And there's been everything used, whether it's shells and beads on a necklace and various things. But eventually, over time, silver and gold became the most used because they were hard to duplicate. And then over time, so in the mid-1800s, most of e-commerce was in physical silver and gold coins. Gold ended up winning because silver is easier to mine. And so the point is, as an economy gets bigger, as the value of the money becomes higher. And as the value of money becomes higher, the desire to create more of it grows. Whether it's a government controlling it or a miner who wants to find it, silver started to have inflation problems because people started printing it. Gold sort of won the money battle because of all things. It is rare and it's sort of easy to measure and transfer. So then, this book goes on to talk about how let me see if I go somewhere else cool here in the Ty Lopez mansion. I wonder if it's cool for me to go over here. Pretend I'm like performing now. So the next thing is that he talks about from 1870 to 1913 was sort of this book talks about that as the heyday of economics, of money, because banks all over the world had gold as a standard. They would issue paper against it, which solved the problem of gold being hard to transport. They issued paper that was directly convertible to gold, and they held the gold in their banks. It was not a fractional reserve situation. Maybe there were some people who didn't have the exact amount, but they always had that you could turn your paper in and get gold. And so what this did was, not only was it hard money and banks were not collapsing, but and lending equaled the amount of savings you had because there wasn't fractional reserve. And internationally, you could price things because every country had their own currency. One country may have, one piece of paper equals 0.4 ounces of gold, and another country had one piece of paper equals 0.7 ounces of gold. Whatever it was easy for you to compute and price all over the world. And we had this standard system, and this book talks about how those 40 years, there were no recessions. The only recession there was in America when they tried to bring back silver, and it created some sort of big disruption. And that the big takeaway point I get from this video, that to me was eye-opening, mind-blowing, and I want to make sure that this is correct before I get too crazy about it, but one thing I've always accepted is true is that any price manipulation creates shortages or surpluses by definition, because when you manipulate the price, you send out a signal to the economy on what to produce, and if the government does price controls, you're either creating a shortage or an oversupply by definition. So now what this book talks about as well is if you manipulate interest rates, by definition, you create recessions, because you create overinvestment in something. And what this book argues is that if you do not, interest rates should not be manipulated, And if they're not, there will not be the business cycle. We take this business cycle as sort of a given, that the whole economy goes into a sort of a tailspin every 5 to 8 years. This book says that doesn't have to happen. Now, and so if they don't manipulate interest rates, there'll be some industries that maybe go up, and then something else is going down, and something else is going up, and something else going down. But not the whole economy at the same time if we don't manipulate interest rates. And then this book goes on to explain how, so then there was the Bretton Woods, the gold standard in after World War II. And I thought that was like there was a real gold standard for a minute, but really the way they explained it is, so the U.S. said, okay, we have this gold to which we're going to link dollars, and then you hold dollars as your reserve currency, not gold, and then you issue your own fiat currency off the dollar reserves. And so the U.S. never even pretended that they were going to only issue an amount of dollars equal to the value of gold. And then all these other countries took their their dollar reserves and issued more fiat currency than they have in dollar reserves. And so we have this fractional reserve banking system where every bank has maybe 10% or less in deposits for all of the money they've loaned out. And then you have the Federal Reserve manipulating interest rates. I read this book, it scared the shit out of me. I'm already sort of concerned about, obviously, our financial system, but this book made it clear. So a couple things I want to say about it. One thing I want to say is, I went to the University of Michigan, majored in economics, and we learned, and this book talks about how the Keynesian, Maynard Keynes, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Keynes, I'll put it in the description, and of course, read the book and you'll see. Talks about how the most important thing in the economy is this level of spending. And so whenever there's a problem, just spend more. And Keynes never even studied economics. And this economic philosophy, I always thought, well, there's something to it maybe, but it just doesn't make any sense. And another thing, so I was in University of Michigan. We never learned anything about Austrian economics, which is a huge part of the economic world, wasn't even taught at Michigan. And the Austrian economics talks about the importance of pricing, the importance of having one standard measure of pricing, and how manipulating prices and currency is bad for the economy. This was not even mentioned at the University of Michigan, a good school. And I remember when I was in Michigan, I thought all these courses, I loved microeconomics, I liked the basic macroeconomics, it was interesting. And then every other course, I was like, this is all communism. I thought I'm the only one who thinks this. Well, this guy talks about it as, that's the deal, man. For some reason, even in America, our economics class, it's like communism. And so, again, this book was eye-opening to me. It rang true. What else do I want to talk about? Now, the book is called The Bitcoin Standard, and he gets to talking about the Bitcoin at the end of the book. I already know a lot about Bitcoin. Some of it he explained was interesting. He's a super Bitcoin maximalist. It was all good. I don't necessarily recommend the book for what he talks about with Bitcoin. A lot of it, I didn't think it was anything earth-shattering. But the history of money that's taught in this book, I thought is fascinating, and it really sort of made it ring clear and gave me super conviction that Bitcoin is the best form of money that the planet has ever seen. And also, having good money, what do they call it, hard currency, is so important. And to have one standard pricing mechanism that is not based on debt is so valuable. And, so again, I want to recommend this book. Now, another thing, at the same time, there are a couple areas where maybe I don't agree. Like, I feel like this guy, he's really, he maybe gone a little too far. He's sort of blaming World War I and World War II. I do believe he blamed World War I on the printing. So all of the banks and governments were, banks were on a gold reserve. World War I started, 1913, they all went off the gold standard and started printing. And what he argues, which makes total sense, is the war, World War I, would not have been so big had they not started printing to steal from their own people in order to finance the wars. And so he blames the wars, he blames, decay in morality, he blames everything on going off the gold standard. I don't know, I'm not that crazy, and nor do I think that, credit and some fractional reserve banking, I'm maybe not as intensely, believe this as intensely as he does, but still, pretty important. And one last thought, too, is, I started thinking, what is the difference between a Ponzi scheme and our banking system? And I'm not trying to be just, an alarmist here or whatever, but my understanding of a Ponzi scheme is that you say, okay, we have this much money, here's your statement that says you have this much, and I don't really have it. I've taken it and spent it elsewhere. The difference between a Ponzi scheme and our existing banking system is simply honesty. The difference between, Bernie Madoff and Bank of America is that Bernie Madoff said he had the money, and he didn't. Bank of America is not they don't pretend they have the money. We know how our current banking system works. They don't have anything to back, and when you give the bank your money, it becomes their money, and they owe it to you, and they don't hold it. They loan most of it out. They only have 10% of the money. So it's sort of like a Ponzi, except they're not pretending. They're sort of being honest about the fact that they don't have the money to back it. I don't know. It's scary, it's risky, and it's sort of and the other thing is we look at the existing banking system as something that's sort of been around forever. I sort of felt like it's been around forever. It's a relatively new invention in the past 100 years, and we've sort of milked it to the point that now we're down to 0% interest rates and printing like wild all around the world. And the key to money in the long run is its hardness, and that it isn't abused and printed. And once it becomes abused and printed, it loses its value. So I don't know. This next downturn, man, listen, the bull case and the story that excites me is when we run to the next crisis, everybody runs to Bitcoin. And then I'll be happy. But I don't know what'll happen. Was 2008, the worst one in a generation, and we'll never see anything like that? Or was that the opening act, and we're about to see, the main course? So, anyways, check out the book. It is interesting, and that is all. Thank you.